So thank you, Alex, to introduce me, and thanks everyone for coming today. As Alex said, I just started my postdoc at DISOC 2 months ago, and this postdoc fellowship has been made possible by Nimbios and DISOC, obviously, but also by the Department of Anthropology and the Department of Information Science. And I want to thank everyone that made that possible, because it was not easy to make me come until here. So a lot of people spend a lot of time solving problems, so I really want to thank them. I am really happy to be here. I hope we will do great things together. Today I will speak about content-dependent bias in social learning strategy and explore them at different time scale and geographical scale. Before that, I just wanted to add this slide. So this is the supercomputer where I was working during my PhD in Barcelona. I was at the Universitat Pompeu Fabra working paid by the European Council. As Alex said, I did the master in cognitive science in Paris. After that, I did a master in history and philosophy of science. And before, I was in a mixed undergrad, mixing computer science and biology that I started in Grenoble, but after I finished it in Lyon, and I spent also 1 year in Montreal. But enough about me. Let's go. So 500 millions, this is the number of active stories every day on Instagram. So it means that there is more than 10 times the number of people in Spain that are sharing some content online. What do we look for in this content? Are we learning some new skills, or do we just want to see what the most famous people are doing? Probably both, I don't know. But what is sure is that this is only like actual and exaggerated visible part of something that humans have done since they are human. It's socially interact. And today in my talk, I will try to explore those social interaction. To do that, I will first introduce you some concept and the method that I will use. Then I will present the first theoretical case study and two case study on real data set, one on online social network and another one with some Roman data, and I will quickly conclude. So we can all agree that the world is changing and culture is changing. The music that we were listening in the 80s is not the same that the music we listen in 2000 or the music that we listen now, right? And the same is true with the way we cut our hair. All those things, I will call that social traits, and people that try to understand how they evolve are studying cultural evolution, and they try to understand what are the mechanisms, the processes behind those changes. Those traits, they can be really diverse in nature. So it could be like the name you choose for your babies, the way you will decorate some potteries, or even the expression, the word we use to express ourselves. They are very diverse, but they all shared some common things, so we learn them socially by interacting with our friends, with our families, at school, or looking on internet and watching the television. And they all follow some similar trends, so they are fashionable, then they fade out, and things like that. So in cultural evolution, people to try to understand what are the processes that drive those change and that produce those patterns. And since like 20 years or even more than 30 years, people are doing that, and they have come up with ideas, and they have shown that you can reproduce those patterns with really simple processes. The most simple that Alex likes a lot is the random copy. And if, for example, you want to choose the name of your baby, you will just pick up randomly one name among the one that you know. This is some study that Bentley et al. Did a few years ago already now. What we can see here, I will spend time explaining that, but because we will see various graphs that are similar to that one. So what we see here is the distribution of US name in the population. And so here is the frequencies of name among the possible name, and here's the proportion of the population that has those names. Sorry, the opposite. Yeah. So this is the frequencies of name in the population, and this is the proportion of name among the possible name. So to make it clear, because it's sometimes difficult to get it, but here what you have, it's a very few kind of names that are found a lot in the population. So in the US would be Mary and John, for example. And here you have a lot of name, like a high frequency, that is found in a few times in the population. And you will have a strange name. We all heard about people that give to their child a really stupid name like iPhone X, and hopefully nobody else will have this name again. And in this study, Bentley et al., they have shown that to reproduce the distribution, which are the dot and the circle, you can just simulate what will happen if we pick up randomly the names, and you will have things that resemble a lot to the reality, which are the lines behind that. You can complexify those process, and instead of just randomly copy, you say, I will copy, but I prefer to copy the name that are the newest name. Or the opposite side, the old school name, let's say. You will be like pro or anti-novelty. And in fact, a few years ago, people have shown that you reproduce better the data about the US name if you do that and if you use those kind of things. You could also like copy given the frequency of what already exists, and you want to pick up a name that a lot of people have it, so we will say that you are conformist. Or at the opposite, you want to pick up like an exclusive name for a child, and you are anti-conformist. So this works, and it has been shown also recently that those processes work well to replicate how are distributed the word we use to express ourselves. To describe those different processes, people in cultural evolution, they speak about different social learning strategies. So the social learning strategy that individuals use to choose different social traits that they want. And those social learning strategy will induce different bias, and we can classify those bias given what impact the bias. So the one that I showed before that are like more context dependent will only depend on what's, yes?
Just to be clear,
yeah.
bias is used in several different ways. Can you define what it is?
Yeah, here it's just to mean that the probability will be changed towards something else. So it's not like a cognitive bias. Obviously, you can have some, just to say that you will have something that tends to something else. And it's really simple. There is no biological meaning behind that or psychological meaning behind that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in the statistical sense, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the content dependent, the context dependent, and some that are content dependent. So it will depend on the intrinsic value of the social trait that you want to copy. There is various ways to have those kind of bias. The first one is direct. So for example, if you read a tweet or if you read a book, you can read it and you know if you like it or not. So you have directly access to the content. Or if you want, for example, to buy a bike, and if you know very well how a bike works, you can test it, you can look at it, how it has been done, and you can choose the best one given this knowledge that you have. Sometimes you don't know that, because maybe you don't know, you are not a big biker, you just know that there are bikes that are better than the other. So one thing that you can do is to imitate someone that is good at biking. So you just watch the Tour de France, you see who is winning all the time, and you buy the same bike that this guy who is winning the Tour de France. Those content-dependent bias are really important because if you're able to select between different options and choose the best one by socially interacting, this gives you a very high evolutionary advantage. And this could explain why social learning is so important in human. I won't speak about that, but I hope that one day I can come back and speak more about those things, because that's some stuff we are working on here at Nimbios with the DISO group. What I will do here is to explore the importance of those content-dependent bias in large-scale change in the human society. To do that, I will compare in the different section of my presentation some bias that are content-dependent and some that are content-independent. So yeah, we don't see very well the green, but that's fine. It's just that I each time try to compare one with the other. But as you know very well here, it's difficult when you do such study to use experimental method, because not like people working in biology, in cellular biology, you can try to knock out some genes to see the action of some protein and to look at what happened when you knock out the gene. Here I cannot call, if I want to know the impact of slavery on the rise of the Roman Empire, I cannot call Caesar and ask him, can you try again but without slavery? And please do it 10 times just to be sure that it's just not a random effect. So it's difficult. And in our case, we don't have like very known laws and equations that describe in any place and in any case the system that we are studying. To solve this problem, what I use, as a lot of people here, is modeling, but not equation-based modeling. We use agent-based models. I know that most of you know about that, but just to clarify, so in an agent-based model, you have agents with different properties, like this, and they will be inside an environment, and this environment will define the rules that how those agents will interact one with the other. and then you look what's happened. Basically, it's like just playing a video game, but when you play start, you cannot do anything. You just see what's happening, and then you study it. What's good with those things is that first they are pretty simple, let's say, to describe, and it's pretty clear what you want to represent there. And for us that are working with like historian or archaeologists, it's often better to have like things where the description is clear to exchange with them. And also we can integrate really different kind of knowledge. So heterogeneous knowledge. We can bring like knowledge from history, like there were three kings, so I put three agents. We can bring some knowledge from physics if I want to incorporate some laws of physics on how things fall down, I can do it. But the problem is that it incorporates a lot of things, and at the end it's often very difficult to test them and to compare them. Moreover, when we have data that are often noisy and not incomplete and things like that. So to solve that and to try to test the different models that we have, in this presentation I will use Bayesian inference that allows us to get the probability of here theta that represent our model, the parameter of our model, knowing something that is the data that we have. So the probability that our model is true knowing the data that we have. But with our model, it's often difficult to get to solve that analytically, to get the likelihood and those things, to get this that we call the posteriors. So what I will use is approximate Bayesian computation that also come from evolutionary biology, where in order to get my posterior distribution, what I do is I simulate my model a lot of time, and from those simulation, I look at the ones that are closest to the data, and I take them as my posterior distribution. And I will use that again later in the talk. So we will do that to understand content-dependent bias in various scenarios, to understand how they can help the emergence of economic equilibrium. We will see if we can detect them at the root of different spread on online social media, and if we can detect them in pattern of economic change in historical dataset. And I will use 3 case studies. First, theoretical exploration, as I said. 1 case study with Twitter dataset, so where what we are looking at spent during like 10 years, I think the dataset is. And another one with the Romanist, with ceramics in the Romanist. Here we speak about hundreds of years. So let's start by the theoretical framework. Here what we want to see, no, but that's fine. The theoretical framework. So the first example I show you in the introduction, the social traits that we see were pretty natural. So the way you cut your hair or the name you give to your babies. But let's say now the trait we will look at are linked to some economic things. So let's say we are looking at that, not my haircut, but wine. So wine is something cultural. There are some cultures that drink wine, some other that don't. There are some cultures that mix wine with soda, some that drink different kind of wine, and so on. And we all know that wine are associated with a price that I put here. And this price comes because you have to produce wine, and the techniques are difficult. But also, we all know that sometimes wine are really expensive because they are fashionable. So let's see what happens if we look at the social trait that is like that. So you see my talk here. I am French. I go back to Barcelona. I am buying my wine from Bordeaux, and you are like a famous blogger from New York, and you go back to Manhattan, and you start to write about this wine because it's cheap and it's not so bad. So what you want, and you start to buy it because it's good, it's cheaper to drink something else. But you are a famous blogger, you write about it, people imitate you, and then you have some people in California, they say, hey, look at that, there are some people that start to drink those French wine in New York, maybe we could produce it because the climate is not that different. So they go to Bordeaux, they learn how to do the same kind of wine, they do it, after some time, they will produce those wine, it will be cheaper, maybe better for you, and you will start to buy it. And after some time, maybe even me, I will say, but yeah, they are pretty good, those wine from California, and I will start to buy that. What happened is that here in Bordeaux, nobody is buying anymore the wine, so they have to close. This simple example is something that really happened during the last 60 years in the wine world. But what's interesting here is what you see there is 2 different kind of mechanisms. Some mechanisms that are social learning, where you learn socially from me what kind of wine is good or not, and other mechanism where there are people that produce wine and us that sell it, buy it, and they sell it to us. So this we can generalize it with these kind of things, where we have like those 2 levels, one cultural level where we have like social learning interaction, and another level where you have economic interaction. And everything that happened at this level will have an impact on what happened at this level, and vice versa. So we have this retroactive loop. And this is what we will study here. And this is also pretty easy to translate as an agent-based model. And it's what we did. So to implement those two levels, we use at the economic side a model made by Jean Thies. At the cultural side, we will use a classical model of people that will copy the best over individual. The model, to explain it a bit more in detail, so there is n different kind of goods and m different agents, and each agent, they will have like a list of value that they attribute to the good and a list of quantity quantity for each good that they have. And this will run for a certain amount of time step. At each time step, every agent will produce one of the good. Then with this good, they will go to a market to interact with every other people and try to barter their good to get all the other goods. And to do that, they will use the list of value that they attribute to all the other good. And they will compute some formula and to try to get all the other good. At the end, they will consume the good that they get, and we will be able to rank them, given if they behaved good during the economic interaction or not. They do that a certain amount of time, and after this, so in that case it was like 10th step, but it's a parameter of the model. After that, they will socially interact. And so they can learn from the other what are the value that they attribute to the good. So you can see that as like the strategy that they will use to go to the market. So, they will socially interact. In that case, they will copy the one that are more successful than them at the market. And sometimes they will just mutate the value they attribute to the good. Mutate like in the biological word, but we tend to say more innovation when we speak about the social trait. Then we will compare two different flavors of this model. In one case, like as I said, people will copy the best, the one that were successful during the market, and in the other one, they will just randomly copy. Like I said, like the neutral model where you randomly pick up a name for the baby. You just choose someone and say, hey, what did you do during the market stuff? Okay, we'll do the same than you. We choose various parameters. We choose them to reproduce some known result from the literature. And this is what you get. So on the left, you have the score of the people if the strategy are copied randomly. What you can see, obviously, is that the score is just random. Sometimes, by chance, like people start to get better score because, okay, everybody copied randomly some people that had good strategy, but they didn't go down. In the other side, when you copy the best, quickly it goes to a maximum and it stays there. Then if we look at the prices, so at the value that people attribute to the good, they quickly tend to an optimal value. That is the optimal value that allows to what economists said, the emergence of a Walrasian equilibrium. This equilibrium is when every market is able to exchange to every other market, so the prices are set in a way that everybody can exchange to everyone else. And if we look at how the strategies are distributed the same way that we were looking at the names in the population, we can see that in the neutral case, the square here, it pretty follows the power law that I saw before with the baby names. And in the trade model, so when you copy the best, the shape is not exactly the same. So what we have done here, we have shown that with a simple local social learning mechanism, we have the emergence of a global equilibrium without the need of any central agent. So it's just local interaction between people. But to have this equilibrium, we need bias toward the best. And with the neutral model, it does not work. And what interests us also is that in both cases, we have seen that the shape of the distribution of the strategy is not the same. So for us, it's interesting because what we want at the end is to detect the different social learning mechanism in the data set that we will explore. And this is what we will do first by studying online social media. And we will try to see if we can detect those kind of social learning strategy in a big data set, but that's spread during a few years. This all starts from a paper from Bozughi et al. That was published now 2 years ago, where the author, what they showed is that false information in Twitter will spread quicker and further than true information. And this, to show that, they show that cascades of retweets are deeper, breadther, and bigger. So for those of you that don't use Twitter, Twitter looks like that. You have your timeline where you see what the people you follow are doing. And here you have the number of retweets that someone that tweeted had. This number that looks like in one dimension, in fact, you can see it like this, because I see the tweet of Hiroki Sayama because I'm following it, but if I retweet it, someone that doesn't follow Hiroki Sayama can retweet it at this turn, and so you will have like a spread as a tree like that with 3 dimensions. And so they have, one of those dimensions, in fact, is the total number of retweets, which is this plus 1, the first tweet. Okay, so they have shown that with this, false rumors are always bigger than true information. What we thought, so this is the work I did when I came here to 1.5 years ago. What we thought is that maybe the reason that the false information go farther and quicker is because it's not the same social learning strategy. And maybe when you spread true information, the social learning strategy that you use are more costly maybe cognitively, because you will like look at the information, you will try to be sure that it's really true. Whereas when you have false information, you don't care about if it's true or not, you just retweet it. To test that, we designed several models of retweeting. One of them is the random one, the unbiased one, where you just randomly retweet something that you see. Another one is like a conformist one, where you will retweet things that are being already tweeted a lot. And the third one, it's like 2 different top model. So top because in Twitter and on social media in general, you often have those web pages that will tell, just look at the 10 tweets that you should have not missed this week. So this will like give like more strength to some short list of tweets that you won't have in general. So we set up those top things. Also in Twitter, you have those trending topics that again like reinforce the retweet of a few selected amount of tweets. To test those models against the data, we will use what I presented before, these approximate Bayesian computation things. And we will use the algorithm that I showed before, where basically what you do is you randomly select some parameters, you use those parameters to run simulation, then you look at the result of the simulation, you compare them to the data with a distance function like here, and if they are close enough to the data, you keep it, if not, you reject it. So the distance function we described is here, so I won't explain it because don't have so much time for that. And we use some prior distribution, so the parameter that we use at the beginning as uniform distribution, and we use those values because we know a bit the model that we were using and the knowledge that we have about the data that we are looking at. And then we run like a lot of simulation, like 35 million simulation. And with all those simulation, what you do with the ABC stuff, you can do 2 things. So first of all, you can select which is the model that gives you closer to the data. So for that, you take the best simulation, like for example, the 5,000 best simulation, and you look how the models are distributed among those 5,000 simulations. So who are the models that produced most of those best simulation? So here you can see that if you take apart the top T model, they all produce the good simulation in a similar way. And this for both the true and the false distribution. We transformed a bit that to take into account the number of parameters and to have like a precise number. Here, the smallest value is the most likely model. So we have shown that this is the neutral model in our simulation. We're the one that is getting us closer to the data. But in both true and false distribution. So we were expecting that if one of the 2 distribution is explained by content-dependent bias, so our neutral model won't explain that at all, but it will explain the other one. But in that case, it explains both of them the same way. Then once we have selected our best model, we can look at the simulation that produces our model and check the parameter that we found. And draw the posterior distribution for the parameter. So here I show you how it looks like for the neutral model. So you take the best parameter and you see how they are. They look so a bit different between the false and true, but in fact the mode and so on are not so different. And what you can do, what's more interesting with that, is that you can take those fitted parameter and you can replicate simulation just to see why and how our model are good and where they are not. So this is what we did, and we run, again, thousands of simulation with those, using the parameter founded by the ABC, and we look at what happened. So here in this graph, what we see is different categories of size and the frequencies of cascade that have this size. The dots here are the data. The square are like the high density region, so the region where our simulation end up. So it means, like, for example, in most of our simulation, they produce a cascade of size like 2 power of 6 with frequencies of the frequency within this. So this allows us to compare where our models are good to replicate the data or not. This is the result with the neutral model. We can see that it's pretty good at doing the cascade of middle size, but it's missing the one here. So the line that it's here, I don't know if you see it well, but this is when we have no simulation that can produce cascade that size. And what you can see is here, like most of our simulation, they just don't do cascade of free tweets that are big like this. And this for the false and the true tweet. And this was true for all of our content-independent model, context-dependent model. So we always fail to reproduce those big cascades. So what we have saw just now is like the unbiased model fit is the one that fit better the distribution and fit them the same way, and this is true for all the model, and they were not able to replicate the big cascade. So this does not mean that there is no It's good for some part, but it was not able to reproduce, the big cascade, And so what we expect is that it will be good for one and bad for another one. It will be good to reproduce the one where the content is not important. So we expected that false, we will be able to reproduce false retweet. But in fact, no, it was able to reproduce some part of it, but not the other one. And this for both true and false tweet. So what it means what we think it means is that in fact there is still two different kind of tweets that are spread by different social learning strategy, some that will focus on the content and some that will not focus on the content. But this content, it's not if the tweet is true or false. And in fact, in our distribution of true tweet and in our distribution of false tweet, there are tweets that are spread by content and the other that are spread not by content. And this colleague Alberto Acerbi is saying that no, what's important is not if the tweet is true or false, it's if the content of the tweet is emotionally high. And if you take the result of the data of the paper that we used, then their paper, they are not showing that false tweets are spreading further and are spreading bigger than true tweet. What they are seeing is that it's easier to have tweet with high emotional contents with false tweet. And if we think about it, it seems logical because it's much easier to create some things that are really incredible if you have the freedom of doing whatever you want. But if you have to stick to the truth, you are less likely to do something that will catch you. So what we think is this, that if we could separate our data set not between tweets that are true or false, but between tweets that are high emotionally content and low emotionally content, here we will see this separation between some that are explained only by content dependent things and some that are only driven by context dependent stuff. So just at a more general level, in this section, what we have seen is that we can use the cultural evolution approach that I presented in the introduction to understand what's happening in online social media. And also that those social online media are a good like playground for people like us to try to test the hypothesis that we have on how humans are interacting socially because there is a lot of data, and also it's really easy, like for example for the case of tweet, the content it's here and we know the content of the tweets, whereas when we look at more historical data and things like that, we have to use proxies and things like this. So that's it for my third part. My second part. So last section. Now we will again try to detect to detect the impact of those different social learning strategy, but in a much broader case study, because it's spanned during 500 years, and the geography is also the difference. And this, what we will use to this time, are those things. So it's sigillata, it's a kind of ceramic used during the Roman Empire, and they use that to do some tablewares. And it can be a lot, like here you have like plates, but they do also bowls, cups, lot of stuff of things. What's interesting with those tablewares is that they are really widely distributed. So here you don't see what's written, I guess, but I took this photo, these pictures in the Museum of Grenoble, the town that is close to where I live from, and here it's written Ebin. So they found it in Ebin, which is a city that is 20 minutes away from the house of my parents, and I live in the Alps, so nowhere close to Rome, not in the Mediterranean. So to say how widely distributed was those plates. And they were like used during a long period of time, and they didn't change much during this period of time. But what archaeologists know also is that they came from different regions. So they did like a lot of chemical analysis, and so they know that there are like 5, 6, 7 different regions of production, because they know that the ceramics came from here and here. And those production regions were active at the same time. So they were at some point competing for this market of those tablewares. And luckily, we also have access to a database that show all that. So this is the Icratis database, where we have like 178 sites in the Romanist that we can see here. In this database, we have like the presence and absence in all those sites of 5 different sigillata. So Eastern sigillata A, B, C, and D that come, as the name says, more from the east of the Roman Empire. And Italian sigillata that comes from Italy, so it's not on the map, but we know that it's like a sigillata that were produced from Italy. And if we look at the pattern within this data set, we observe that this. On the left side, we have the diversity. So for each site that I show in the map, for each site in the map, how many different sigillata we will find. And we see that at the beginning, they were like just using 1 or 2 different kind of sigillata, and after that there is a surge in like more diversity. On the right side you have how many sites are using one kind of sigillata, and you see that at the beginning here like ESA, everybody is using ESA everywhere. Then new sigillata are arriving, and you have like this Italian sigillata that arrive from nowhere, and it start to be one of the most used sigillata. Archaeologists are trying to understand that, and what we wanted to do here is like maybe those changes can be explained by social learning strategies. And by doing that, we wanted to answer some archaeological questions that some archaeologists already started to work on that, and we follow this work by Brugman and Poblome to try to understand the economic organization of this time by using our hypothesis. And by doing so, trying to understand how well the market was integrated during this time, and how many economic and social interaction the different cities had at this time. The good thing in this, with this setup is that you can easily translate it as an agent-based model, and it corresponds totally to the one that I presented before. So we have a cultural side where they will say, oh, look, in Rome, they are starting to using this Italian sigillata, so I will do the same than them. And you have like a region of production that produce those sigillata, and I compare for the market. So we use the model that I presented before to test our different hypotheses. What we did is represent 3 different hypotheses. One that we call the independent learning, so where the agent, they just don't go to copy anyone, they just randomly mutate their own strategies. The unbiased social learning that I showed before, where you just randomly copy, and the success bias, where you copy the best of our agent. And in our case, our agent will be like the market, city with market. This time, the one problem is that the model is much more complex, but not much more, but it's more complex than with Twitter, because in Twitter we had like, you just, to know the content of the things, you just have to flag if it's true or false. So you look at your tweet, it's true or false, you retweet it or not. In that case, you have to do that, but you have also to go to the market. And when you go to the market, you have a list of price. You have to compute like what is the best trade-off that I can get given what I have and what I can get from the market. So this takes time. If you have a lot of agents, we have simulation that can last like 3-5 minutes, and you cannot run like 40 millions of simulation as we did before when it lasts so long. Even if you have a supercomputer, well, you could, but they won't let me do it. Hopefully, there are some optimization of the ABC algorithm, and we use one by Beaumont et al. In 2009. So this time, instead of like simulating everything and take like an epsilon, so the level at which you say that those simulations are good, really small, and then you will need a lot of simulation to get enough simulation to draw your posterior. You will go step by step, and at first you will select even simulations that are not that good. And so your epsilon is pretty high. And once you select enough simulation, in that case like 500, when you select those 500 simulation, you will use the parameter of those simulation as your prior for the next ABC. So you have like sequential ABC, one after the other. And this allows you to simulate much less. We did here 14 epsilons or 14 steps, where like it transformed into there. Again, we choose the prior as uniform distribution, and this we define that with the archaeologists, given the knowledge that they have about the transport and all those things. And the distance function, that was a hard thing. So in all of that, I haven't speak about the hard part of it, which is finding the right distance function, because obviously this is the central thing that will articulate your data with your simulation, and it's really not easy to find a good one. Moreover, that here with the archaeologists we wanted to be able to match everything. So for every period that we have in every site, be able to reproduce what we see with our model. So you have to look at every period and in every region, and there is those two patterns. So the one on the left that I show for the diversity, and the one with the distribution of each where. So we just do the mean of both of them. With this, we run the simulation, and this time like you have those steps that I speak about, and you have like each time like a small ABC. And what you see here is how many simulation do we needed to get the 500 that we want. So just by looking at that, you can see that here, the opposite. How many simulation we accept, and so here we can see like here we accept a really low simulation. So it means that we needed a lot of simulation to produce good enough simulation. Whereas for the green one, we produce like at the beginning almost half of our simulation were good enough. After, obviously, when the ratio is going down, it's harder and harder to get a good simulation, but then you just stop. And the idea here is to draw the posterior. You just take the last steps, and here you have like the posterior distribution of our model. So who are able to produce good simulation and who are not. And we see that already just here that the success bias strategy was not working at all. Just to put some numbers on that, you can take this and do the ratio between those different between those distribution and drive some bias factor. So those is like dividing the likelihood of all the model, and you can get like the strength of one model over another. And we can see that like here the independent model, so where they don't socially copy the other, is twice more likely to explain the data than the unbiased, what is itself, and it's 23 times more likely to explain the data than the success bias, to see how much powerful it is. Again, as we did before when we did the ABC in the previous section, we can also look at what are the parameters for our simulation that allows us to go and to get good simulation. And we have the posterior distribution of the parameter. And here I show this posterior distribution for the best model. It was the independent model. And what's nice here for archaeologists is that it gives some interval between which our model are credible, are likely, let's say. Yeah, so like here what you have is the prior distribution, and here's the posterior distribution. So among our best simulation, how the parameter is, and so you can calculate the identity region to have like the most likely parameters, and then you can like explain that in real in world. Like for example, here what we saw, this is the total number of cultural interaction in our simulation, and our posterior distribution, given that they should be around 4 to 8, one cultural interaction every 4 to 8 years, that every year they should have like around 1.5 to 3.4 economic interaction, and well, this is pretty wide. So yes, that's it. So what I have shown here is that it looks like in our case the innovation are like the way they change their strategy does not depend to the others, so they are not socially interacting with the other, and at least not looking at the best other agents. This does not mean, obviously, that the market in Rome, people were just randomly changing their prices. This does not mean that it was not integrated. It's like just on the scale of our study, because there are some hypotheses that are like very credible that say that this kind of projects, so the tablewares, like ceramic tablewares, are cheap products that they don't have a market by themselves, and usually they were sold with other stuff. So they don't find like boats just full of tablewares. Usually you will say, okay, I bought iron or wheat from this country, and there is like some producers of tableware there, and they will just load some batch of tablewares with these iron things. So that's one of the hypotheses that we propose here. But at the last, with the previous slide, I show that it gives some credible interval that are credible, like one economic interaction 4 times a year. Given the transport system of this time, it's not unreasonable. Okay, generally, this research have shown that it's possible to quantify those different social learning strategies using archaeological data. And when we do so, it's nice because we can try to answer historical and archaeological question. And this is made possible by when we try to transform the archaeological question into the model that I did, we can quantify those questions, those hypotheses, and test them. And thanks to technique like the ABC process that I show you, we can quantify them and test them one with the other. Finally, it's important to do that also for archaeologists, for them to answer some questions, but also for people that are more interested in like large-scale social evolution, because obviously historical and archaeological remains are the only data set that we have on large scale to test if our hypothesis, the hypothesis we think it happened like this or this, is the only way to test them is by looking at those archaeological and historical data. So it's important to keep them. I went pretty quick. I hope I didn't kill you. Sorry. So just I will conclude. I have shown that I think was pretty clear that culture is changing, and this is changing. And there are in different scenarios it's changing because people will use different social learning strategy and will do different choice that will have different consequences. If I show you this. We will choose our computer given the price and the knowledge we have of its power. So we will look at the intrinsic value and the intrinsic power of these computers. But if I show you that, we may just randomly pick up a hat because they are pretty similar and they are pretty the same price. But if I see you this, maybe you will change your mind and you will choose something else. This will have an impact on you. The question is, the question is, can we try to know what will happen if suddenly we stop to choose our computer by looking at their intrinsic value, but we randomly choose them and we just want to follow what Roger Federer is doing? Can we try to understand what will happen at a large scale? And if we put ourselves like hundreds of years later in the feet of our great children, will we be able to look, if we look at our garbage and we see that, okay, there were those people on 21st century, they were buying computers and suddenly they stopped and they bought some blue hats. What happened? Will we be able to give, our great children, will they be able to say, okay, they stopped to buy computers because they realized that it was costly for the planet and maybe they don't need powerful computer, but they should focus on buying some trade fair hats because if not, they will just not survive. Will our grandchildren be able to detect that? I think that in this talk, I showed that yes, it's possible to answer those questions. So we can try to predict what will happen at large scale using some theoretical exploration of those choice and social learning processes. We can understand what's happening right now by looking at social media and by testing them by using the technique I have shown. And we can also have a hint on what happened in the past just by looking at the remains that we have, and we can try to quantify which one of those social learning those people were using. And then, to conclude, and to finish with that, I will finish with that. So more than 5 million years ago, like some mammals started to walk on their feet and speak with each other. We don't know yet exactly why they did so, but something is sure is that from like group of people from 5 to 10, where the social interaction were like limited to someone screaming, hey, be careful, there is an eagle, you should hide. Nowadays, we live in a world where the biggest company that make most money, they are just selling you way to interact socially. And it's in such a world, like important people, head of states, they can send content on those social media, and this content will have economic impact on foreign country, and some people may lose their job or whatever. And more recently, we have seen that it could also decide to start a war or not. So in such a society, in such a world, understanding the processes that are behind those changing is crucial, not only to understand why the world as we see it is like that, but also to prepare ourselves to the change that are coming. And yeah, that's it. I have also this, so this is like all the things that I have shown. It's really dense, sorry for that, but it has been, I presented it at various conferences. The two first section have been published in Proceedings and in a journal. One is it will be published in a book soon, like the last section, and so the archaeological side of this last section is under publication in a book, and we are trying to publish like the technical side of these parts. And that's it. So if you have any question.
Thanks for an interesting presentation. I have actually two questions. One is about those two social learning strategies that you provided. One is content dependent and context dependent. So my question is, which one has more explanation or understanding power? Let me give you one example. Just a week ago, I read information very interesting that last year 2019, in London, according to the statistics, the most popular newborn babies that you mentioned, one of form of strategy, was in London last year. What is the most frequent baby name? You know what? Mohammed. So there are two different explanations, and I wonder how you apply those two social learning strategies. One people say, hey, that's because of physical migrants who came during last year, and just they are growing much more faster than the others, and that's why they gave birth much more baby than that, and it's very logical that they gave them their own name. So it is the context dependent as far as I understand. The other people say, no, it's not because of that. Well, you just calculate what minority gave birth in 2019 in London. It's not about that. It's because of, sort of new culture, social culture, philosophy, inclusive and diversity, and because people used to demonstrate their respect to minorities, they provide this name, not because they are physically more than that. So which one is more relevant, and which, on your point of view, of these two strategies has more understanding power?
That
Explanation.
really, really nice question. Thank you. Like, it's funny because I was at the class of Alex this morning, and he was speaking about this. When are we looking for explanation or just prediction about what we are looking at? But in that case, I am more on the to look at what has more explaining power, the side of what has more explaining power. I think that it both could be true, and in that case, you could explain what it's happening with a content independent, like with the context, as you say, by the migrants that are coming. You could probably explain it like this, or with like some more social change that are happening, like the culture of people is really changing. But here, I may not be able to answer it, and this is what I really like with my job, with what I'm doing, is that I will need some sociology, some people that know about sociology, anthropologists, that knows about what is really happening in London, what people are doing at some smaller scale, and historical data about if this immigration hypothesis is true. We should be able to show it, or if it's likely, maybe you can just, like someone with like historical knowledge, like in London will say, no, but look at, I have the data of immigration with the number of people that potentially they can call their child Mohammed, and you can try to model that and see if it happened. So if you have the good data, and if you have the people that can understand those data and translate that in those model, you could test both model and see which one can explain. But they will, I mean, there is not one that will be, both will explain if you find the right way to implement them.
Your answer is that it depends on the actual facts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Either it's content or context.
Yeah, and yeah, that's it.
Okay, if so, may I ask the second question?
No.
Okay,
First.
good. Next one.
And then come back if we have time.
All right. So first of all, thanks. I know nothing about Roman history, okay, obviously, but I do know that I'm derived, at least culturally, from peoples that were in a restricted part of that large area.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, there are, I presume, a wide variety of cultural differences in the region in which these artifacts were distributed. Is there any way in the modeling end of it that you account for the spatial patterning that may be connected to cultural differences or other things?
Yeah. Well, so in this case, there is no spatial. We don't take into account the spatial geography.
There wasn't any.
But in fact, for the sigillata, there is not so much. This is why it's striking, and they don't understand it very well, is because those things you will find them in all the Romanism, but in all the Roman Empire, and there is no like cluster. Like it's not like, oh, in the east they use the Eastern sigillata. Now it's really mixed, and it changed. Like it's really hard to know why it changed. So for that they try to do new modeling to.
So there's no spatial spread models. I mean, you have time.
Yeah. But no. They are really at the. I mean, they when they are together, they are present everywhere together. So when you have like at some point the five are used, the 5 different kind of sigillata are used, and they are all used at the same time. And even they are not necessarily used in the region where they are produced. There are some really special cases where people are just consuming what is produced in the region. But in fact, in the Roman Empire, usually what happens is that the empire, Rome, is asking for things from the different provinces. And so it does not stay in the province. So you produce it, it goes to Rome, and then it goes everywhere. So you don't see those kind of special, like, okay, yeah, they started to use this here, and then it spread. In this data set, you don't see that at all. No.
Thank you. I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I have a modeling question. So as far as neutral models are concerned, there is pretty straightforward way to do that, right? Just by definition, you copy something with the frequency that's present in the population. But there are many different ways to do non-neutral models. So you kind of picked up one and you say it's not good, but what it really tells us.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you just came up with a bad model.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know, because clearly kind of we do care about the quality of the stuff and the usefulness.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I mean the thing is that you can always come up with other model that will be better or worse. But first of all, it was like more like to test the method. Do it work? Can I do it? I mean, can we do it together? Because it's not me. Each time it's a lot of people. Can we understand a problem and formulate it in a way that we can model it? Then obviously we have to choose a way to model. So there it will depend on me what kind of model I can do and I will do, and the historian and the archaeologist or the sociologist how he will explain me the problem, and me I will say, okay, so maybe we can do this kind of bias. Is it interesting? So what we try to do here does not appear because it was the talk I did for my defense for my PhD, but for the paper, for example, the work I did with Tom, the central thing was to try to understand archaeological question. So the modeling for them is like they don't even care about that. So can we try to model something that will help you to navigate your archaeological and historical question? Obviously, probably there is much better model that can be done to explain that, but it's a start. It's like not so much people have done it, so we start that, we propose them, and then people can come and say, no, this was like, why you model that? It's useless. Do something else, and then I will be happy to change it, to work and to test other things.
One comment I want to make, sorry. You might want to let people know that your approximate Bayesian computation methods are so insane. You know, millions of simulations. I think we actually had to drop one of our crucial parameters in this, which was a utility function for the messages. Because it adds up to tens of millions of simulations, and even just neutral copying with a few biases was like all that we could handle. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean,
you could handle. Sorry, even using a supercomputer. Is that right?
Yeah. But I'm not really comfortable with this question because.
And can you just comment on the computational requirements of ABC? Why people might be asking, well, why haven't we done this for 20 years?
As I said, like it was like, if you think about numbers, like 30 millions of simulation that we did for this paper, for like 35 millions of simulation. I said like my over model, some of the parameters that it will take like 6-7 minutes to run the model. If you want to do 40 millions of simulation that lasts 6 minutes. Obviously, like you need years and years. If you use a supercomputer, you still need like 23,000 processors running at the same time during 1 week to do those 40,000 millions of simulations. So it's really huge, and for that I was not able to do it because I cannot ask my supervisor, give me like that much computational power during 1 week. Why I'm not really comfortable with that is because obviously the problem also is that I have to deal with a lot of different things that are like the modeling side and working with the specialist, and there's a lot of things on the probability side and mathematical side that I am not aware of that. I have to deal with all the programming things, and to program like those big simulations just to store it, you have to store teras of data, and so you have to handle that, to analyze it, to store it someplace in another place. So a lot of work that I cannot spend looking at how I can just optimize the mathematical function that are behind. But there are like better way to do it. So I think it's like I use it because it's clear, it's understandable, I understand it, I can do it. But probably we can like go much more closer to the data more quickly without the need of that.
This is also why you make use of any unused computer.
In Nimbios.
One last question from Damien, but I'm conscious it's 4:30.
Great talk, Simone. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
Staying on the topic of ABC, I wanted to ask you about Beaumont's implementation of ABC.
Yeah.
You said that it was very difficult to choose the distance function.
Now, this is true for any kind of ABC. I mean,
What kind of factors go into that choice?
yeah, I mean, this was the hardest part of all those work. It was like to work on that. It's really nice for someone like me, like a modeler, to work on those distance function, because this is what you will say, okay, this is my model, this is the reality, and you have this link between both of them, which is the distance function, but at the same time you have to know, because your distance function will hide some things, because you use like summary metrics. In that you will use the mean of something to compare to the mean of something else, but maybe what you want to know is the variation of that, not the mean. So in the distance function you have to take that into account, and you never know if the result maybe will be different, and maybe it's because of the distance function was not good, so you have to come back. But it's so much computation that you cannot really test it and then come back. So it's like a trade-off, always a trade-off that you have to do. And after, at some point, you are like, okay, this is what links my model with the reality. And as a modeler, that's something that you don't have a lot of time, but when you see the posteriors like drawn and you say, okay, so my model look like that if I linked it to the reality through this distance function. This was like, this for me what's really nice. But to find a good distance function that will answer your question, that will deal with all the computational problem, the size of the data set that you need and all, and that will not hide important information, but will discard the one that are like just noise, it's really difficult. And I spoke with specialists like Ann Candler and people like that to say, okay, I am in trouble. What can I do? And they told me there is no really, like, it's like that. It's hard. You have to try. You have to practice. If you know a lot of probabilities and mathematics, you can like have some guides to that. But there is not yet like clear way to choose them.
And as a final question, which do you like better, a nice posterior distribution of a parameter or a nice cheese?
Cheese, definitely.
Why even ask? The man has excellent knowledge of cheese and wine, by the way. So, and speaking of, I think people are going to Sutries. Is that the, yeah. And thank you very much, Simon.
Yeah, thank you.
Lovely talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much.